Progressive Democrats are calling for the expulsion of Republicans that they say incited the events of the 6th, the storming of the U.S. Capitol. Now, that's just plumb ridiculous. These politicians, these Republicans, did not incite anything simply by objecting to the Electoral College vote count. That is a constitutional process by which they are allowed to do. And just because you don't agree on the accusations or the allegations doesn't mean it was wrong of them or was inciting anything that they raised these objections. But we can now see the conflation of constitutional electoral challenges with incitement to insurrection. They're saying that Donald Trump should be impeached for incitement of insurrection. But at no time did Donald Trump tell anyone to do anything violent or to storm the Capitol. In fact, in his speech, he actually said, peacefully march and cheer on those politicians. It is quite unfortunate for Trump. This was the moment where there were supposed to be Republicans presenting concerns and allegations and potential evidence so that the American people would finally hear what these people were talking about. Too many on the left, or too many individuals who only watch mainstream media, probably don't know what the actual allegations are. Unfortunately, Trump wanted a peaceful march and the cheering on of the politicians, and instead what happened was people stormed the Capitol. For this, Trump has been accused of inciting the group. But there's some interesting facts and unfortunate facts for these Democrats in that, according to the New York Times, Donald Trump was still speaking when people started storming the Capitol. Before people at the Ellipse listening to Trump spoke even got to the Capitol, there were already people storming through the barricades and trying to make their way inside. And Trump said to be peaceful. Now, by all means, criticize Trump's response during and after the fact. He probably should have known what was happening. I was following it on Twitter, and Donald Trump should have immediately called for it to stop. Instead, he gave some tepid statements. He said, leave in peace, go home in peace, never forget this day. And it wasn't until the next day that he issued that statement. But we can argue about Trump, don't get me wrong, but Trump's on the way out in 8 days. Joe Biden will be sworn in as president. There's probably going to be a lot of protests. I remember the inauguration of Trump last time. It was particularly nasty with Antifa, and I imagine it will get particularly bad this time around. So please, I hope everyone takes security very, very seriously down in D.C. But Donald Trump is on the way out. These Republican politicians were doing their duty in upholding the will of their constituents by objecting. Many people knew that it was all for nothing. The media had said it was pointless. It's doomed to fail. And I'm sure many of these politicians knew it too. They just wanted a chance to make sure their constituents were being heard with their complaints. It is not insurrection to follow a constitutional process objecting to a vote. They'd have lost. That'd have been the end of it. But now they're trying to push it all a step further and expel these Republicans, which, let me just tell you, will do nothing. It will not work. But more importantly, it shows, in my opinion, the weakness of the GOP compared to the centers of power on the left. Now, truth be told, Republicans have tried to expel Ilhan Omar in the past. It's not like the idea of expelling someone from Congress is brand new. But what we're seeing right now, after a year of left-wing riots, Kamala Harris and Biden's campaign supporting the rioters, fundraising for them, many politicians offering up defense, many media personalities and news organizations offering up defense. And then you see the Republicans just say, please, unity. In response to the calls for unity, the left has just said no. Expel them or resign or be stripped of your committees. And it's not just the progressives. Some mainstream establishment Democrats are joining in as well, which shows you the seats of power in the Democratic Party lean towards the progressive and far left, and the seats of power on the Republican side actually lean closer to the center, which presents a very serious problem. If we keep getting these ineffectual Republicans who are like, I'm going to go by process and y'all need some unity, while they're saying kick them out, you can see the disparity here. Republicans will just keep folding over and the Democrats will keep trampling through. Truth be told, though, we do need unity. Everybody needs to calm down, which is why right now the criticism is focused on the left for their calls for expulsion. You need to stop and chill out. But let's read what's going on, and I'll tell you why I believe this is doomed to fail. And we have the story from Now This. Lawmakers call to expel Republicans who voted to overturn election results even after pro-Trump riot. But before we get started, head over to timcast.com to become a member, and you'll get exclusive access to Timcast IRL podcast content, as well as access to upcoming events. Assuming lockdowns are lifted and we can operate within the guidelines, we're going to be having real in-person events with some of our guests talking politics, music, video games, culture, etc. Again, go to timcast.com. You can scroll down, become a member. We're still working out the bugs, so please bear with us as we get this launch rolling out. There may be some errors. You may encounter some problems, but we will get it all sorted. You can become a member very easily, and then we're still yet to populate the members-only content, but it's coming. Your support here really does help, especially considering a lot of the censorship. But don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let's read this story just a little bit from Now This News. They say 8 Republican senators and more than 130 House representatives objected to the Electoral College count during the formal congressional certification last Wednesday. They say Republican Senators Josh Hawley, Cruz, Tommy Tuberville, Roger Marshall, John Kennedy, Rick Scott, Cynthia Loomis, and Cindy Hyde-Smith sustained objections to the Electoral College count, and so did more than 130 GOP reps. Some have dubbed them the Sedition Caucus. Additional Senate Republicans had previously planned to join the group rejecting electors from disputed states during the formal counting in Congress on Wednesday, which would have only delayed, not stopped, the certification of Biden's win. Senator Lindsey Graham and Kelly Loeffler, who lost her seat last week to Raphael Warnock, had previously backed Trump's lies for months, but acknowledged on the floor Wednesday night that Biden rightfully won the election. They mention Now This News, which is a progressive outlet, that it wouldn't have even changed anything. It would have slowed things down. Well, we can see here from the New York Times, sure, now Ted Cruz and Kevin McCarthy want unity. As if it's only just now. Objecting is a constitutional process. It wasn't violence. It wasn't calls for violence. They weren't telling anyone to do anything. They were saying, I object. We need a hearing on the evidence. That's it. That's still unity. You can still be in unity with the government and with the left and still object in a constitutional manner. Objecting to someone's positions is not threatening them in any way. And that's the opinion we get from the New York Times. Wonderful. Rep. Cori Bush, a progressive, says, I don't want to unite with those responsible for the insurrection at our nation's capital. I want us to unite in holding them accountable. Right now, this is the worst possible thing to be happening. We don't need this. You're not going to accomplish anything. You're not going to expel them. It's not going to happen. All you're doing is inflaming your side. But fine. I suppose that's what they want. I actually, I'm willing to accept unity at this point if it means there's no conflict and no escalation, because we are dangerously close to hot conflict. We don't want it. Unless she does, I don't think they know or care what they ask for. Cori Bush posted yesterday, I just introduced HRES 25. It would, under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, investigate and expel the GOP members of Congress who attempted to overturn the election and incited a white supremacist attack. Call your rep to sign on. We can't have unity without accountability. You see what they're doing here? They're obsessed. It's a tribalist bloodlust. They can't stop. They can't just stop. Now, Republicans are weak. Don't get me wrong. But at least they know where that line is. In response to Ted Cruz and Hawley calling for unity, they just get attacked. They get insulted. The left doesn't want unity. There won't be unity. Look, when we had the massive riots across this country, Kamala Harris supported them. Well, I guess they could have called for her expulsion at the time, and maybe it would have been the right move because maybe she wouldn't be vice president. They could have raised 14th Amendment questions about her eligibility for office as well, and maybe Biden would have had to have picked someone else, but they didn't. And now the progressives are as well. Again, don't get me wrong. Republicans have in the past called for the expulsion of Ilhan Omar. It's not unique right now. But at the time they called for the expulsion of Omar back in 2019, we weren't dealing with this extreme level of escalation. Well, what is the 14th Amendment? Let me tell you why it's a wasted effort. All this will do is cause a dramatic escalation in the culture war, in the cold civil war, bringing us dangerously close to hot conflict. My friends, we just saw people storm the Capitol. A police officer is dead. A woman is dead. 3 others died. Look, you can argue we are not in a civil war, whatever you want to call it. Maybe that's still true. Don't look at me. I'm not the historian who's going to tell you when and how we determine whether or not we are in a hot conflict. But where we were before with, say, Oregon defying federal authority, with clashes between different factions, Trump supporters, Proud Boys, a Trump supporter being shot dead in Portland, Oregon by a self-avowed Antifa. And now we have an actual storming of the Capitol where two factions are fighting over control of a government, and it's resulted in physical conflict. The door's been opened. Call it what you want. If this continues, there's no doubt in my mind that history will look back on this as some kind of civil war or whatever you want to call it. But the conflict is here. I'm not trying to, the last thing we need is conflict. The last thing we need is escalation. But I don't think it matters what my opinion on the issue is, because people literally stormed the Capitol and some called it a revolution. But let's talk about the 14th Amendment, why it's doomed to fail, and it will only result in more anger and animosity. Yahoo News says, what is the 14th Amendment? They say, while there has been focus on President Trump's possible impeachment and the use of the 25th Amendment to remove him from office, some House Democrats say they will invoke the 14th Amendment to call for the removal of Trump and congressional Republicans who helped incite the insurrection through their push to invalidate the results of the 2020 presidential election. Quote, if we allow insurrection against the United States with impunity, with no accountability, we are inviting it to happen again, says Ocasio-Cortez. She said this on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. She is conflating a large group of people who stormed the Capitol with Republicans following a constitutional process. You see where the error is? They say, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the U.S. or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the U.S. shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. That's not going to happen. They're not going to pass this. 2/3 of each house. It's not there. But look at what they're saying. Given comfort to the enemies thereof, please. The objection to the electoral process is constitutionally protected and, dare I say, required of those who represent their districts to challenge what they view as unjust. That is process. It's fine. You either win or you lose. It's not insurrection to say, I'm going to follow the Constitution. Now, you want to make an argument about the people storming the Capitol because they were unhappy with the results. Well, I think they ultimately hurt Trump. They go to mention Cori Bush, who I quoted. They say she wants to remove those who sought to overturn the election. We already know what her quote is. They're going to mention many of these politicians, which I've already named. They say, what are the chances of the 14th Amendment succeeding? They say, while it might pass the Democratic-controlled House, the prospects of Bush's bill passing the Senate with 2/3 majority it needs are remote. More likely to succeed are motions currently being discussed to censure Brooks and other members of the GOP. Censure, in the case of someone like Brooks, is very easy. If passed, it would require Brooks to stand in the well of the House and listen to a formal reading of his condemnation by House colleagues. It's a scarlet letter. Oh, a scarlet letter. What is the point of trying to do this? All it's going to do is rile up their base. But it's not just Cori Bush. Democratic Senator Whitehouse. The Senate Ethics Committee must consider the expulsion or censure and punishment of Senators Cruz, Hawley, because of massive potential conflict of interest. Senators Cruz, Hawley, and Johnson need to be off all relevant committees. If they can't kick them out, they're going to try to strip them of their authority within committees. Sherrod Brown says both Hawley and Cruz have betrayed their oaths of office and abetted a violent insurrection on our democracy. I am calling for their immediate resignations. If they do not resign, the Senate must expel them. Absolutely absurd. Betrayed their oath of office to defend and uphold the Constitution by following a constitutional process objecting? There are real questions about the election. I guess that's the end of it, though. There's not going to be a hearing. And I got to be honest, when the Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building, any chance of getting that actual presentation of concerns and evidence was shuttered for the most part. Many people still had their voices heard before it all happened. Now, outside of expulsion, there is something called the Speech and Debate Clause. This protects members of Congress from arrest. So I don't think it would even ever get that far. And that's a good thing. but I don't think it's necessarily on the table. The general idea of the speech and debate clause is to prevent people from stopping members of legislation from having their votes or from challenging one branch or the other. In the spirit of the speech and debate clause, you're allowed to come in and object, and they shouldn't hold it against you. They're going to mention the speech and debate clause states that members of both houses shall in all cases, except for treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and from the same. And for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. It says arrest, but you can go on and argue that the following provision about being questioned in any other place could reference potential expulsion or their objections to the electoral vote count. To conflate the two, I believe, is dangerous. Listen, I don't think AOC or Cori Bush should be expelled. I think they should just calm down and please simmer down. You know, we need calm in this country, but you've got elements of both sides that don't want it. On the right, they're calling for unity. That's a good thing. What can I criticize there? That maybe they should have done it sooner, perhaps. That maybe they're a bit weak, sure. But if the Democrats keep escalating and pushing and saying no, it's only going to escalate and get worse. Jim Jordan called for unity, and Representative McGovern fires back, glad that all it took for you to call for unity and healing was for our freedom and democracy to be attacked. But for the last several months, Jordan and others have given oxygen to Trump's conspiracy theories. So what? You're allowed to be stupid. If you think that this stuff is wrong and people are dumb, it's not an argument for insurrection or sedition. Having a legitimate argument in Congress is allowed. When Jim Jordan comes out and tries to actually call for unity, they fire back and they say no. And here we go. From AOC, ABC News, the process of healing is separate and in fact requires accountability. And so if we allow insurrection against the United States with impunity, with no accountability, we are inviting it to happen again. Without it, it will happen again. You know what? Fine. Then all those who supported Black Lives Matter as they rioted through this country and Antifa as they set up autonomous zones should be expelled. I got no problem getting rid of all of them. I'm down. Let's have a discussion. We'll go through all the Democrats who in any way defended or supported the insurrection against our institutions throughout the entire year, the attacks on federal buildings. Anybody who comforted these individuals, get them out. And I'll say the same to the Republicans as well. Anyone who comforted or abetted and defended the insurrection. So that means if you're a politician who defended the people storming the Capitol, gotta go. And if you're a politician who defended the autonomous zone, Antifa, or Black Lives Matter, gotta go. You know what would happen if that were the case? Not a Republican would be removed, and many Democrats would be. Why? Because the storming of the Capitol has been universally condemned, and not a single Republican told any of these people to do it. You see? Republicans won't call for the expulsion of the left, so I can only imagine it'll just get worse. In this thread from Amuse on Twitter, we can see a series of posts, of videos of the left advocating or encouraging physical confrontation, outright violence, incivility, calling for people to fight back. Here's Colin Kaepernick saying we have the right to fight back. The cries for peace will rain down, and when they do, they will land on deaf ears. Here's Kamala Harris fundraising for those who are arrested for rioting, who are challenging our institutions and trying to destroy them. Are these people going to be expelled? Maybe they should be. Twitter allows Khamenei of Iran to be on the platform. Here's people calling for violence, outright overt calls for violence. But I'll tell you what I see here in these posts. Amuse is attempting to show the double standard. We know there's a double standard. We've all known there's a double standard. Parler gets purged. Meanwhile, the violence on Twitter is allowed. Amazon says nothing. They defended their corporate partners and those who would make them more money and their political ideologies. The Democrats defended physical confrontation. I say physical confrontation because some of it was getting in the faces of people, which is the precursor to outright violence. But some of these individuals did call for fighting back. It's allowed. You know what we see from this? A thread just explaining how the right has already lost. Why? You could simply say, I'm going to do my best to adhere to my constituents, or to represent my constituents, and they'll say, expel them from Congress. You could call for unity and peace, and they will try to remove you. That's just the name of the game. Yet they, for the entire year have been escalating and calling for more. Where have been the Republican attempts to derail or to expel or censure even? Was Kamala Harris censured for fundraising for rioters? Of course not. The bias is obvious. The system is skewed, and it is obvious the right has already lost. They've already done it. They've done nothing to actually stop any of what was happening. Trump could have joined any one of these social media platforms outside of the big three whenever he wanted. He never did. Trump could have made more heavy moves against the far left. He never did. So why is Trump going to pardon Assange? Probably not. Is he going to pardon any of his supporters? Probably not. He pardoned his buddies. That's probably the end of it. So listen, they'll criticize Trump. They'll claim he invoked or incited, but it's just not the case. When you go to the New York Times, and let me show you this, Donald Trump, they say, when the first barriers were breached, Trump continues speaking. That's right. When people were pushing on the barriers, knocking them down, and storming the Capitol, Trump didn't even finish speaking. So who are these people who are ignoring the speech from the person they so admire, who called for a peaceful march? Maybe not necessarily, I'll call them Trump supporters, but maybe more like Boogaloo Boys, people who are less concerned about Trump and more concerned with challenging the government. Trump supporters have been saying since this day that they will follow Trump's lead. And when Trump says no to violence, they said, okay, just go to the Donald.win, the main Trump supporter hub, and they will tell you outright, if Trump says go home in peace, they will do so because they support Trump. But there are a lot of people who support Trump who aren't the same. Just because you are a Trump supporter doesn't mean you're a Trump supporter first. Some of these people like Trump because he's the raging bull in the ivory tower, but they would prefer, I guess, Boogaloo, as it were. And those people were storming the Capitol while Trump was speaking to a rally. Many of these people who were at the rally peacefully left. In this story from the AP, the Army is investigating an officer who led a group to the Washington rally. But this officer says they were at the rally where Trump was speaking, got on their buses and left. And now she's under investigation. For what? The AP says they're investigating a PsyOps officer who led a group of people from North Carolina to the rally in Washington that led up to the deadly riot. Commanders at Fort Bragg are reviewing Captain Emily Rainey's involvement in last week's events at the nation's capital, but she said she acted within military regulations and that no one in her group broke the law. I was a private citizen and doing everything right and within my rights. She said she led 100 members of the Moore County Citizens for Freedom, which describes itself online as a nonpartisan network promoting conservative values, to the Washington rally to stand against election fraud and support Trump. She said she didn't know of anyone who entered the Capitol and that they were headed back to their buses hours before an emergency curfew took effect. So that's it. She's under investigation. The establishment is going to go after people who are just there. That's it. Were you in D.C.? That's probably enough. Seriously. You were at Trump's speech? Too bad. They're not going to differentiate. If you were an organizer at that event, they will likely purge you, even if you had nothing to do with the storming of the Capitol. The right, in my opinion, has been routed at the very least. When I say lost, looking at all of the stuff from the left and the calls for violence, I think they did. I mean, the right has lost all the cultural institutions. They're being purged from social media. And there's and it's not even just conservatives. If you look at Dave Rubin, for instance, and Locals, his social media platform, many of these individuals are not conservative or far right. They're like moderate and centrist. And they're fleeing to other platforms because the chopping block, well, it's a coming. And it doesn't matter if you're conservative or moderate or centrist or whatever. You're all the same to the far left. So here it comes. It's funny. I posted about, going to timcast.com and becoming a member. We're going to have members only posts soon. It's going to be great. And there are people saying, Tim, you're not going anywhere. Twitter won't ban you. Oh, please. Listen, I've already had videos removed from YouTube. I've not received strikes for some of them. We had a warning on the podcast we did with Alex Jones, just a warning. But I've had videos taken down from my channel for things that weren't violations of the community standards. So yes, we are at that moment where it's not just conservatives, but maybe the end result won't be all bad. It's kind of like, the more they pull the blocks out from the Jenga tower, the more likely it is to fall. As Twitter continually isolates people, creating a platform just for the left. then why would anyone use it? I mean, I got to be honest. I don't really see a point using Twitter anymore. Look, there's reasons why social media platforms didn't really take off. Who wants to look? I'm going to slow down. Why should I be active on Parler if it's just an echo chamber of the right? And many of these people on Parler were also already on Twitter anyway. So I'm going to speak more effectively on Twitter. But then they banned Parler, and now now on Twitter they're purging QAnon adjacent, I guess it is, people who are sharing content similar to QAnon stuff. Sure, fine, whatever. You get rid of people to have debates with and conversation with. What's the point? Why even be on the platform? I gotta be real. At this point, I can get my news aggregated from other sources. I don't need Twitter. And so Twitter's becoming boring and people are leaving. And I think Twitter might see a huge drop off in their stock value because they got rid of one of the most entertaining people on the platform. Now you're going to have many leftists and activists using it as a left-wing activist hub. That's all it really is. You know, I used to post my videos there. I'd say, here's the video, it's up, to people on Twitter. And I realized that was a bad idea. All it did was signal to the left that I made a video, and then they would come and just give a thumbs down and insult and berate. So what was the point? So I stopped doing it. Then I just posted random shower thoughts and I don't check mentions anymore. I used to use it to communicate with people. Now, what's the point? I got to be honest, I'll probably just slowly stop using it because there's nothing to really even tweet about anymore. I mean, kind of. But all that I see now on Twitter is screams from the left. They're in trouble. They're desperate to use whatever they can to maintain what little influence they had left. The Trump era may be coming to an end. Jim Acosta's no longer the White House correspondent for CNN. It's now Caitlin Collins. The yelling at Trump era is over. The Trump era of yelling back is over. And maybe this results in all of these inflammatory media outlets just fizzling out. Good. They'll accuse me of the same thing, but let me tell you something. I've been doing this for a long time, about a decade. And my work was never predicated upon the culture war. Now, there's cultural issues I can talk about, but as I mentioned many times, when we started the Timcast IRL podcast, we were doing segments on Bigfoot and UFOs. And we were doing segments on Sonic the Hedgehog and Birds of Prey and other movies. And we're slowly pushing back into that. We've done several segments on UFOs, and we'll continue to because there's new information about UFOs coming out soon. Well, actually, I think it just came out. The CIA dropped some documents. But with COVID and the lockdown, politics became the only thing available. The only thing we could discuss is why we were all being beaten down, what the crisis was, and what the fight was. Plus, it was an election year. Now I think it's time for people to calm down. I'll certainly embrace it. And you know what's going to happen? We're going to watch all of these anti-Trump personalities whose entire career were built upon yelling about Trump fizzle out, burn out, and go away. And you know what's going to happen? With shows like mine, we're finally going to be able to break free and talk about more important things and different issues like we were in the beginning. Believe it or not, while we did have on the Timcast IRL podcast our biggest shows around the election for obvious reasons, we actually had more success talking about cultural issues and cultural politics as opposed to talking about straight news. But when everything fell apart, all that there was politics. And we're pushing against it. And that's the plan. You know, one of our top videos, we talk about like feminism and dating. It's more fun. And we're going to bring those guests back and we're going to focus on wider cultural issues. So I'm going to try to slowly stop all of this. But for the time being, in the next week or so, we'll see where things go. I don't chase after views as much as the left would try and argue it's true. It's not. I just talk about what I think is most important at the time. And right now, what I think is most important is actually stopping the vitriol and the hate and focusing on other things. And that's why we're focusing on building the vlog, and we have the new website, because we want people to learn to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, to have fun, to explore, and not just focus on all the rage all the time. Maybe, we on the podcast and myself played an outsized role compared to other channels simply because I was getting so many views. And sure, I don't care. By all means, criticize me. I'm going to do my best to try and help everybody simmer down to the best of my abilities. I can't tell you what to think. I can't make you simmer down. I can just try and give you outlets and encourage independence, stoicism, rationality, pragmatism, etc. Calm. But by all means, you can focus on what you want. There's going to be a lot of people who already don't like that. There's a lot of people who don't want to watch much of my videos or give it thumbs down. So be it. I'm going to tell you what I think, and I'll always try to be as honest as possible. I say as honest as possible because sometimes there's private information and there's people's safety and there's certain things I can't say, but I got no problem being blunt. Someone sends me a book. I'm like, you going to read it? I was on the IRL podcast with Sean Parnell. He gave me his books. Like, you going to read them? I'm like, I'll be honest. I'm not going to read them. Like, I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm just trying to tell you the truth because people send me books all the time. I don't have time for this stuff. And, other people might be into it. I'm not going to lie. That's where we are now. Hopefully we find a way out of this mess. And hopefully everybody finds an outlet, calms down, hangs out with their loved ones, and finds out what's really important to them. Hopefully. We'll see how it plays out. But stick around. Go to timcast.com, sign up, become a member. We're going to start having this members-only content probably in the next couple of days or so. So it should be a lot of fun. Thanks for hanging out. I wish you the best. Look up, think positively, and I hopefully these people on the left find that way, find that path forward as well. The next segment is going to be live, youtube.com/TimcastIRL at 8 p.m., where we should have a bit more fun and humor tonight. So I look forward to it. And we try to have a bit more levity on the podcast than I do on these shows, on this show. So thanks for hanging out. And I'll see you all at 8 p.m. tonight.